My brother told me to stop fixing his problems at his 30th birthday party, so when his son had a severe allergic reaction and he called me panicking about the EpiPen, I reminded him he didn't need my help anymore. I'd been helping to take care of my younger brother Damien when he completely lost it during his 30th birthday party at the rooftop bar I'd reserved. "You need to stop fixing everything for me," he announced to our entire family when I said I'd always be there for him. "I'm not helpless. Stop acting like I need you to solve all my problems." I was literally holding the keys to the condo I'd bought him, the one where Damien had been crashing rent-free for 6 months. Mom gasped. "Damien, that's not— It's literally my birthday and I'm sick of it. Everything is always— Kevin paid for this. Kevin handled that. I'm sick of it. We all are." He downed his whiskey. "For once in your life, stop playing Kevin saves the day." The entire table went silent. I slowly pocketed my condo keys. "You're absolutely right. I'll stop fixing things for you. Completely." Damien looked surprised but pleased. "Finally, thank you." The next morning, Damien knocked on my front door to ask for help with his resume. "Can you proofread this? That marketing director position closes on Friday. That sounds like fixing your job situation. I don't do that anymore." "What? I just need your help editing. You said you don't need me solving your problems." "That's literally solving a problem, bro." Damien lasted exactly 4 days before testing my boundaries again. He called me at 9 a.m. asking if I could babysit last minute on a Saturday, like always. "Are you cool with watching Archie tonight? That sounds like a Kevin saves the day situation. But the show got canceled, remember? It's just for a few hours. Mom might be available, or you can ask a neighbor." He ended up not finding anyone. I know, because the next morning my mom tried to angry call me, but I reminded her that we have to respect Damien's boundaries. The real fun started when Damien needed me to pay his rent. His lease office called since I was the secondary guarantor. "Oh, that's a mistake. Damien doesn't need me fixing his problems. He's made that abundantly clear. Sir, he's almost 3 months behind and this could land him in eviction. I have no involvement in Damien's obligations." I later found out he had to pawn his wife's wedding ring just to afford rent for the month. 2 months later, Damien's wife Lucy needed emergency gallbladder surgery. The same woman whose IVF treatments I'd quietly paid for. She called from the hospital, crying through the pain medication. $8,000 deductible, she whispered. I reminded her about Damien's birthday speech, about not needing me to fix things. "But you paid for our IVF." "Well," Damien said, "that made him feel helpless, and I'm just trying to be a good big brother." The line went dead. I heard later she'd maxed out 3 credit cards. All I wanted was for Damien to apologize, to tell me that he appreciated what I did for him, but he couldn't even do that. 3 weeks later, an unfamiliar Chicago number called. Vice president of marketing position at a prestigious company. Damien had listed me as his primary reference. I can't discuss his qualifications. He specifically asked me to stop fixing his life. The hiring manager paused. "But you're his reference?" He was clear about not needing my help. That missed job opportunity broke something in Damien. He started drinking more, calling me less. 3 weeks later, at 2 a.m. on a Thursday, county jail called. Damien got nailed for a DUI after his company happy hour. $5,000 cash bail. I'd love to help, but that would be classic Kevin saves the day. And you specifically said, what was it again? "Oh yeah, we're all sick of it, right?" 5 days. That's how long he sat in county lockup while his public defender arranged a bondsman. His mugshot made the local blog. I'd made my point. Damien had learned to live without me. We hadn't spoken in weeks. I should have known the silence meant something worse was coming. It was 7 p.m. when my phone rang, and Damien's panicked breathing filled my living room. "Kevin," Archie's face is swelling. "I don't know how to use the EpiPen. That would be fixing your emergency." "Kevin, you're his father. You don't need me solving everything." I'd already dialed 911 on my work phone, already given them Mom's address, but I stayed silent while Damien fumbled around, his sobs mixing with Archie's wheezing. "Kevin, I'm sorry. Is that what you wanted to hear?" "I'm sorry." "Sorry for what exactly?" "For everything. For the birthday. For being ungrateful. For— Please, he's my son. I thought you didn't need me fixing your life. You're my brother. You've always been there, and I was jealous and stupid and drunk, and I need you. I've always needed you." The sirens were already approaching. I'd made sure of that. "EpiPen is in the blue pocket of the diaper bag," I said quietly. "Orange tip goes against his thigh. Hold for 10 seconds. Now hold him upright and keep talking to him until the paramedics—" "How did you—" "I called them the second you called me. I'm in the driveway." Silence. Then Damien's broken voice. "You're here? I'm always here, you idiot. Even when you don't want me to be." I paused. "Oh, and Damien? That VP job you wanted? It's mine now." I could hear Archie crying in the background. Damien wasn't comforting him anymore. The ambulance doors slammed open and 2 paramedics rushed past me with their gear, one of them already asking Lucy about allergies while checking Archie's vitals. Damien stood frozen in the doorway, his face going through about 10 different emotions while the paramedics worked on his son. Lucy climbed into the ambulance without even looking at me, her shirt still covered in Archie's vomit from the reaction. The lead paramedic nodded at Damien to get in, but he just stood there staring at me, and I could see the exact moment it clicked that I'd taken the job he'd been talking about for months. I got in my car and followed them to Northwestern Memorial, already doing the math on what an ER visit plus ambulance ride would cost without decent insurance. The waiting room was packed, but they took Archie straight back, and 20 minutes later, Lucy came storming out while Damien sat hunched in a plastic chair. "You let him panic for how long before telling him about the EpiPen?" She was shaking, whether from anger or fear I couldn't tell. "And you took his job?" While we were dealing with this question mark, I reminded her that Damien specifically said at his birthday that he didn't want me fixing things anymore. "That's what you call this? Respecting boundaries?" Her voice cracked. "You're punishing a child because his dad hurt your feelings?" Damien didn't even look up from his hands. The doctor came out an hour later saying Archie was stable, but they'd keep him for observation, and Lucy went back without another word. Damien finally stood up and walked past me to the exit without saying anything, and I sat there for another hour before driving home. Mom started calling at 6 the next morning and didn't stop until I picked up at 9. "This has gone too far, Kevin. He gets it, okay? He understands what you've done for him." I told her I was just doing what Damien asked, respecting the boundaries calories he set. Don't give me that. You're being cruel, and you know it. She said Dad would be ashamed of how I was acting, which was a low blow even for her. Maybe you should stop enabling him too, Mom. Let him figure things out himself like he wanted. She hung up on me. Monday morning, I walked into the sleek downtown office for my first day as Vice President of Marketing, and Juliet Daniels was already waiting in the conference room with my onboarding packet. I heard about your brother through the hiring process, she said, not even pretending it wasn't a thing. I need to be clear that personal drama can't affect your performance here. We hired you for results, not family baggage. I assured her it wouldn't be an issue, that my family situation was completely separate from work. Good, because the last person in this role let their divorce destroy their productivity, and we can't have that again. She slid over my first assignment, a campaign that needed salvaging, and I spent the rest of the week buried in spreadsheets and strategy decks. Thursday, Lucy texted that Damien's DUI arraignment was scheduled for the following week, and he couldn't find a lawyer who'd take payments. He called 3 firms but needs $5,000 just for the retainer, her message said. I didn't respond. Damien ended up with whatever public defender the court assigned, some overworked guy juggling 40 cases who had maybe 10 minutes to review the file. 2 weeks later, Lucy called crying because the hospital's mandatory reporting had triggered CPS due to the combination of Archie's emergency and Damien's recent arrest. They're saying the drinking puts Archie at risk. We could lose him, Kevin. Do you understand that? We could lose our son. I felt something twist in my chest, but reminded myself that Damien had created this situation, not me. He needs to get sober then, I said. That's on him, not me. She called me a monster and hung up. The next day, a CPS intake worker named Daphne Klein called to schedule a home visit and mentioned they'd need to verify all caregivers knew how to use an EpiPen properly. You're listed as an emergency contact for Archie, so we'll need to confirm you're trained as well. The reality hit me then that this wasn't just about Damien anymore, that Archie could actually end up in foster care if things went wrong. Friday night around 10, Damien showed up at my door looking like he hadn't slept in days. I need to apologize, really apologize, not that panic apology from the other night. He sat on my porch steps and talked for 20 minutes about how he'd always been jealous, how he'd resented me for being successful while he struggled, how the drinking had gotten worse because he couldn't face being a failure. What would it take to fix this? I'm trying to understand Kevin's method here. Did he already know where the EpiPen was because he'd been tracking Damien's life even after cutting him off? Between us, I told him he needed to get sober first, then create a real repayment plan for the $200,000 I'd given him over the years and prove he could stand on his own feet. $200,000? His face went white. Jesus, Kevin, I didn't realize, but he nodded and said he'd try. Monday's staff meeting was brutal because I almost started bragging about beating out 3 internal candidates for the role, and Juliet pulled me aside afterward. You need to focus less on proving yourself and more on actually delivering. I don't care how you got here. I care about what you do now. Her directness stung because she was right. My family drama wasn't the only place where my ego was causing problems. That afternoon, Lucy texted that collection agencies were calling about her gallbladder surgery bills, $8,000 plus interest and penalties. Do you know any resources for medical debt? She asked, carefully not asking for money directly. I sent her links to 3 legitimate debt relief websites, but the whole time I knew I could pay it off with 1 phone call to my bank. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table that night and pulled up Excel. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every cash withdrawal I'd made for Damien over the years. The condo down payment was $60,000. IVF treatments ran $38,000 across 3 cycles. Bail money, rent payments, car repairs, medical bills, groceries, utilities, $212,000 total. My hands shook a little typing the final number. I printed it all out. 23 pages of itemized expenses with dates and amounts. The next morning, I drove to Damien's place and knocked. He answered, looking rough, stubble grown out and eyes bloodshot. I handed him the stack of papers. What's this? I told him it was everything I'd spent on him since college. He flipped through the pages and his face went white. $200,000? I said I didn't expect it back tomorrow, but wanted him to acknowledge the debt. He nodded slowly and signed the bottom page with a shaky hand. That was Tuesday. By the following Monday, Mom called me crying. She'd found Damien passed out in his garage with an empty whiskey bottle. His boss had chewed him out about missing a deadline, and he'd stopped at the liquor store on the way home. Lucy hadn't called me about it. Mom said Lucy was done calling me for help. The silence from them felt weird after years of being their emergency contact. 3 days later, Damien texted me a screenshot. His work insurance had finally approved therapy sessions after months of denials. Starting next week with someone named Amir Compton. Just wanted you to know. No request for gas money to get there. No asking me to pay the copay. Just information. It was the first time he'd done something without my involvement. His first session was Thursday afternoon. Mom called me that night sobbing because Damien had called her from the parking lot afterward. He'd told Amir everything about being jealous of my success since we were kids. How Dad leaving made him angry, but I got promoted at work the same week, so he couldn't be angry at me. How every time I helped him, he felt smaller. Amir had helped him see that his resentment was really shame about needing help. Mom said Damien cried harder than when Dad left. Meanwhile, Vincent Coffey called about Damien's DUI case. The court-appointed attorney laid out what Damien was facing. Ignition interlock device for 18 months at $70 monthly rental. Mandatory alcohol education classes, 12 sessions at $50 each. SR-22 insurance that would triple his rates. Probation fees of $40 monthly. Vincent said Damien had asked him 3 times if there were payment plans available. He was calculating costs on a napkin during their meeting instead of asking me to handle it. The following Tuesday, Daphne Klein showed up for the CPS home visit. She walked through the house with a clipboard, checking everything. The EpiPens in the kitchen drawer were expired by 6 months. The liquor cabinet didn't have a lock. No emergency action plan posted anywhere. Cleaning supplies under the sink weren't secured. She documented it all while Lucy scrambled to explain. Damien got defensive and started arguing about government overreach. reach. Daphne stayed professional and handed them a list. You have 2 weeks to address these items, or we'll need to consider placement options for Archie. Lucy went pale. That Thursday, I showed up at Archie's allergist appointment. I sat in the back corner while the doctor went through the action plan. She stressed that every caregiver needed proper training on the EpiPen. When she asked who else watched Archie, I raised my hand. Damien's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Lucy mouthed, "Thank you," while he stared at the floor. The doctor scheduled a training class for the following week. Friday morning, their landlord taped an eviction notice to their door. 3 months behind on rent plus late fees. They had 30 days to pay $8,000 or get out. Their credit was shot from the medical bills and missed payments. Damien knocked on my door that night. "Would you co-sign a lease for us? Somewhere cheaper?" I shook my head. He nodded and left without arguing. I spent that whole night researching, found 12 apartment complexes that worked with bad credit, created a spreadsheet with monthly costs, deposit amounts, distance to Archie's school, added links to food banks, utility assistance programs, free legal aid, emailed it to him at 2 a.m. without any message. His reply came back 10 minutes later. "Received, thanks." 2 words, but I could feel everything behind them. Sunday dinner at Mom's house was quiet until dessert. Then Mom just broke, started crying into her pie about missing how things used to be, how she hated seeing her boys like this. I set down my fork. I liked being needed. The words came out flat. Being the family savior made me feel important. Mom stopped crying. Damien stared at his plate. Lucy held Archie tighter. I used money to feel necessary. More words I hadn't planned to say. Every check I wrote made me feel valuable. The dining room felt too small. Damien looked up finally. I knew that. His voice was quiet. "I hated you for it, but I took the money anyway." Mom reached for both our hands. "My boys." That's all she managed before crying again. Archie started fussing and Lucy took him outside. The 3 of us sat there not talking while Mom's good china got cold. 3 days after that dinner, I saw Damien's beat-up Honda loaded with food delivery bags when I stopped by Mom's place. He was checking his phone between runs, tracking orders while Lucy posted photos of her Coach purse on Facebook Marketplace. She had it spread out on their kitchen table with good lighting, taking pictures from every angle. The price kept dropping every time I checked the listing. Started at $800, down to $550 by Wednesday. Damien picked up Friday and Saturday night shifts, the busy times when drunk people ordered too much food. He'd leave at 5 p.m. and get back after midnight, his car smelling like French fries and Chinese takeout. Lucy sold her wedding jewelry next, everything except the ring itself, posted it in 3 different buy-sell groups, met buyers in parking lots while Damien watched Archie. They weren't calling me anymore when money got tight. 2 weeks passed before Daphne showed up again. No warning, just knocked on their door at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I heard about it from Lucy later, how they scrambled to show her the new EpiPens mounted in the kitchen, the child lock on the liquor cabinet, the emergency action plan taped to the fridge. Daphne checked everything on her clipboard, opened drawers, tested the cabinet lock, made notes about the cleaning supplies now stored up high. Lucy's hands shook while Daphne inspected, but everything was right this time. The case would stay open, Daphne said, but they were doing better. Lucy cried in the bathroom after she left, while Damien just stared at the TV. That same week, I completely spaced on a campaign presentation because my phone kept buzzing with Mom's texts about the family situation. The slides were still half done when Juliet walked into the conference room expecting my pitch. I fumbled through it, missing key data points, forgetting the budget breakdown. She called me to her office afterward, closed the door, and told me straight up that she hired me for results, not to watch me fall apart like the last guy. The way she said it made my stomach drop. I'd been so focused on Damien's mess that I was creating my own. Thursday morning, Damien had his weekly session with Amir, the one his insurance finally approved after 6 weeks of waiting. I only knew because Mom mentioned it, how Damien came out looking wrecked but somehow clearer. Amir had walked him through how Dad leaving when we were kids and Mom trying to fix everything created this whole pattern. Damien realized he'd made me into the dad he never had, then hated me for being what he needed. The session left him quiet for days, processing stuff he'd never thought about before. Vincent met us at the courthouse 3 weeks later for Damien's plea hearing. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and anxiety. Vincent had worked out a deal where Damien would plead to reckless driving instead of DUI, but he'd still get the breathalyzer thing in his car, 26 weeks of classes, and $4,000 in fines. The judge, an older woman with reading glasses on a chain, warned him that any slip-up meant 6 months in county. Damien stood there in his only suit, the one from his wedding, and accepted everything without looking back at me in the gallery. Lucy caught me outside after, grabbed my arm in the hallway while Damien talked to Vincent about payment plans. She was done being stuck between us, she said, done watching Archie lose his uncle over male pride. How did Kevin manage to track every single expense down to the exact dollar over all those years? The detail in that spreadsheet must have taken forever to put together. 23 pages sounds like he kept every receipt. She wanted me at Archie's allergy safety class next week, not as the guy with money, but just as his uncle. Her eyes were hard when she said it, like she'd practiced the speech. I nodded, and she let go of my arm. The preschool meeting happened the following Tuesday in a classroom that smelled like crayons and hand sanitizer. I brought laminated cards showing the EpiPen steps with pictures, made copies for every classroom. The teachers passed them around, thanking me for the practical help, while Damien actually said thanks without sarcasm. First normal moment we'd had since his birthday. We sat in tiny plastic chairs while the school nurse demonstrated the trainer pen. 2 weeks went by before Damien texted about doing a practice interview for some marketing coordinator job he found on Indeed. Not asking for a reference, just wanted to practice with someone who knew the field. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. He showed up with printed questions, a fresh haircut, trying to look professional in khakis and a polo. The interview went bad from the start. He couldn't answer basic questions about his 5-year plan without mentioning jail or drinking. When I asked about his biggest weakness, he rambled about letting people down. His hands shook holding his resume. I gave him real feedback afterward, told him to stop stop apologizing and start selling what he could do. He took notes on his phone, didn't get defensive, just kept asking follow-up questions. That felt like something new. Then Friday night, Mom called from the ER with chest pains, and they admitted her for observation. Her blood pressure was through the roof, they said, probably stress-related. Damien and I ended up in the same waiting room at 2 a.m., both of us in sweats and old t-shirts. We didn't talk about money or lawyers or who was right, just sat there drinking terrible coffee from the machine, taking turns checking on Mom, both scared she might actually have a heart attack from all our drama. The doctor came out at 4 a.m. and said Mom was stable, but they wanted to keep her another day. Damien and I both stayed until visiting hours ended, then went to our cars without talking about anything real. 2 days later, Damien called to say his therapist, Amir, wanted him to write amends letters to me and Lucy. He said it like he was asking permission, which was weird since he'd never asked before. Amir told him the letters had to take full responsibility without asking for anything back. Damien spent the next 2 weeks working on them, texting me random questions about dates and events from years ago. I could tell he was struggling because he'd call Mom asking about specifics, then hang up frustrated when she couldn't remember exactly when things happened. Meanwhile, I sat at my kitchen table one night and started writing my own letter to him. I wrote about how I used money to keep him needing me, how I liked being the one everyone turned to. The words came out ugly on the page, all about control and making myself feel important by keeping him small. I folded it up and stuck it in my desk drawer, not ready to admit any of that out loud. Lucy called me that Thursday, asking if I knew any good divorce lawyers, which caught me off guard. She wasn't filing yet, she said, just wanted to understand her options with Damien's DUI and their money problems. The lawyer she met with told her she'd probably get primary custody, but child support would be almost nothing given Damien's situation. She cried on the phone telling me this, saying she didn't want to break up their family but didn't know what else to do. The next week, Daphne from CPS sat them down for a case review and laid it out plain. Any relapse, any safety incident, and they'd remove Archie from the home. Damien sat there white-knuckling his coffee mug while Daphne went through the requirements. Lucy started going to Al-Anon meetings after that, learning how to stop covering for him and making excuses. She'd text me after each meeting with things she was learning, like how she'd been enabling without realizing it. Damien was doing food delivery to make extra money when one of the restaurant managers mentioned they needed a marketing coordinator. It was a mid-sized company, nothing fancy, but Damien applied without telling anyone at first. He used his own connections instead of asking me for help, which felt different. When he got the interview, he just texted me a simple message about getting it on his own and asking for luck. I texted back, good luck, and meant it. 3 days later, the company's HR person called me since I was listed as a past employer on his resume. She asked me to verify his employment dates, and I confirmed only the basic facts, fighting the urge to either help or hurt his chances. It felt strange being neutral, just stating dates and titles without adding anything extra. That weekend, Lucy asked to meet for coffee and told me something I wasn't expecting. She said she'd always resented the IVF payments because they came with invisible strings attached. She felt like she couldn't ever disagree with me or set boundaries because I'd paid for Archie to exist. The guilt hit me hard as she explained how trapped she felt between being grateful and being uncomfortable with my involvement. I apologized, really apologized, for not seeing how my gifts were actually transactions with hidden costs. She nodded and said she needed me to know before things went further with Damien. At work, my first big campaign launch went badly, like really badly. The numbers came in 40% under projections, and Juliet made me present the failure analysis to the entire board. I had to stand there and explain my mistakes without blaming anyone else or making excuses. The board members asked hard questions, and I had to own every bad decision, every missed warning sign. It was the kind of humiliation that teaches you more than any success could. Juliet pulled me aside after and said failing was part of learning, but hiding from failure wasn't acceptable. About 3 weeks after writing his letters, Damien called and asked if he could come read his amends letter to me in person. He showed up at my apartment with pages in his hand, shaking a little as he sat down. He read through it slowly, taking responsibility for his choices, for the drinking, for taking my help for granted, then resenting me for it. He didn't ask for forgiveness or help, just acknowledged the pain he'd caused and the patterns he'd created. The sincerity was uncomfortable to sit through because it was so different from his usual deflection. He did the same with Lucy the next day, and she told me later it was the first time she'd heard him take full responsibility without making excuses. The interview at the restaurant company happened the following week, and Damien called me after to say it went okay, but not great. They gave him specific feedback about needing more digital marketing experience and stronger Excel skills. Instead of spiraling into self-pity like usual, he signed up for free online certifications that same night. He sent me screenshots of his course enrollment, not asking for praise, just showing me he was doing something about it. It was the first time I'd seen him respond to rejection with actual action, instead of just complaining or giving up. Amir called me the next week and suggested we do a joint session to figure out what healthy help actually looked like. I showed up at his office on Thursday morning and found Damien already sitting there, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. We spent an awkward hour with Amir, pushing us to define real boundaries instead of just punishing each other. He made us write down specific situations where help was okay and where it wasn't. Damien could ask for rides to appointments, but not gas money. I could offer advice when asked, but not unsolicited fixes. We agreed that emergencies involving Archie were always exceptions. The whole thing felt like negotiating a business contract with someone you used to share bunk beds with. Amir kept stopping us when we'd slip into old patterns, like when I started listing all the times Damien had screwed up, or when Damien began his usual victim routine. By the end, we had this weird document that basically said we were allowed to be brothers, but not enabler and dependent. 2 days later, Lucy dropped the separation bomb on Damien during what he thought was going to be a regular Friday dinner. She told him she needed space to figure out if she even wanted to stay married after everything that had happened. Damien called me from his car afterward, not asking for help, just needing someone to know he was sitting in a Walmart parking lot trying not to fall apart. He found a studio apartment near Archie's school the next week, this cramped place above a dry cleaner that smelled like chemicals, but was all he could afford. They worked out a custody schedule where he'd have Archie every other weekend and Wednesday nights. The landlord wanted first and last month plus security, which cleaned out what little savings Damien had managed to scrape together. I helped him move his stuff in my truck, but didn't offer to pay for anything. We carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs in silence, while Lucy stayed at their old place with Archie. Daphne showed up 2 weeks later to inspect the new place and make sure it was safe for overnight visits. She checked the smoke detectors, looked for window locks, made sure there were childproof covers on the outlets. The apartment barely had furniture, but Damien had set up a little corner for Archie with his toys and a sleeping bag until he could afford a real bed. Daphne took photos of everything and asked about his work schedule, his support system, his plans for maintaining stability. She said if they could keep things stable for another month without any incidents, she'd recommend closing the case. The relief on Damien's face was so intense, I thought he might cry right there in front of her. Why does writing things down seem to help them both think more clearly? The way Damien spent weeks working on those letters, calling mom about old dates, it's like he needed to see everything on paper to really understand it. About 3 weeks into the new arrangement, Damien's delivery company had this mandatory mixer at a sports bar for all the drivers. He texted me around 8 that night saying everyone was drinking and giving him crap for ordering Coke. 20 minutes later, my phone rang, and I could hear the noise of the bar in the background. He didn't say anything at first, just breathed into the phone while I listened to people laughing and glasses clinking. Finally, he whispered that he was in the parking lot trying not to go back in and order a beer. I didn't tell him what to do or offer to come get him. I just talked about random stuff, like how the Cubs were doing and this weird customer complaint I'd gotten at work. We stayed on the phone for 40 minutes until he felt steady enough to drive home. He texted me when he got there with just "made it." I showed up at his apartment around 11 that night without calling first. We drove to this 24-hour diner off the highway and sat in a booth drinking terrible coffee until 2 in the morning. We didn't talk about the money he owed me or Lucy or any of the heavy stuff. We just sat there like we used to when we were teenagers, and Dad would work late and Mom would fall asleep early. He told me about this kid on his delivery route who always waited by the window for him. I told him about Juliet making me redo an entire campaign because the font was wrong. Normal stuff. When the check came, he paid his half without me having to say anything. He drove home, and I followed to make sure he got there safe. 3 weeks later, he surprised everyone by finishing his court-ordered alcohol classes 2 months early. The instructor said Damien had perfect attendance and participated in every discussion. The early completion meant the judge reduced his fine by $500, which might as well have been $5,000 given how tight money was. He sent me a photo of the certificate with just a thumbs-up emoji. No long message about how he was changing or how sorry he was, just proof that he'd done something right. I texted back, "Proud of you," and meant it for the first time in years. The next week, Lucy and Damien met with a mediator to hammer out their separation agreement officially. They sat in this sterile conference room with a retired judge who helped them divide up their nothing. Lucy got the car, Damien got his tools, they split the debt down the middle. When it came to Archie, they both shut down all the arguing and focused on what would keep him stable. They agreed to live within 10 minutes of each other, communicate through a parenting app, and never badmouth each other to their son. The mediator said it was the most mature separation she'd seen all month. I decided to list the condo while all this was happening, put it on the market on a Tuesday, and told Damien he had 60 days to find something else. When he asked why now, I admitted that keeping it had been about control more than generosity. I liked knowing I had that leverage, that he needed me for shelter. He surprised me by saying he'd figured that out months ago and had already been looking at other places. He'd even applied for a housing voucher through some program for people in recovery. The timing actually worked out because this small logistics company called him the next week about a coordinator position. It was entry level, paid maybe half what he used to make, and came with a 6-month probation period where they could fire him for any reason. But it was a real job with benefits and regular hours. He accepted immediately and started planning a budget on this app he'd downloaded. He showed me how he could cover rent, child support, and even save $50 a month if he was careful. 2 weeks into the new job, I got a notification from my bank about a new automatic transfer being set up. $50 from Damien's account to mine, scheduled for the 1st of every month. There was a note in the memo line that said, "Beginning, will increase." It would take him 40 years to pay me back at that rate, but that wasn't the point. He was acknowledging the debt without me forcing him to. 3 weeks later, Juliet called me into her office for my 6-month review. She had this spreadsheet pulled up showing every campaign I'd run, every deadline I'd hit or missed, every meeting where I'd talked too much or not enough. She pointed at the early months where I'd tried to prove myself by undermining coworkers and taking credit for team wins. Then she showed the shift after she'd called me out, how I'd started actually listening in meetings and giving credit where it was due. The numbers backed it up too. Our team's output had jumped 20% since I'd stopped trying to be the hero. She slid the promotion paperwork across her desk and told me the probation period was over. I was officially VP now with the salary and stock options to match. I thanked her for not giving up on me when I'd been acting like an ass those first few months. That same afternoon, Daphne called about closing the CPS case. She came by Damien's apartment one last time with her clipboard and went through her checklist, checking the locked medicine cabinet, the posted allergy action plan, the fresh EpiPens in their labeled spots. Lucy and Damien sat on opposite ends of the couch while she talked about how much progress they'd made and how Archie was clearly thriving despite everything. She handed them the official closure letter with the standard warning about maintaining safety protocols and wished them well. After she left, they took Archie to the park to celebrate, not touching or talking much, but both pushing him on the swings and catching him at the bottom of the slide. Mom ambushed us the next week with an appointment she'd already booked with a family therapist downtown. The three of us sat in this beige office while the therapist asked about our childhood and how Dad leaving had affected our dynamics. Mom kept trying to explain why she'd always smoothed things over between us, how she thought keeping peace was her job. I admitted I'd gotten addicted to being needed, that solving everyone's problems made me feel important. Damien talked about feeling like a failure next to me and how the resentment had been eating at him for years. The therapist had us practice new patterns right there in the office. Mom had to sit on her hands. When we disagreed about something, I had to let Damien finish his thoughts without jumping in with solutions. Damien had to ask for specific help instead of expecting rescue. We left exhausted and raw, but scheduled another session for the following week. That night, I typed up a simple list and emailed it to Damien with the subject line, "What I can offer." The list was short and specific. I'd drive Archie to medical appointments if given 48 hours notice. I'd do practice interviews for job applications if he scheduled them in advance. I'd answer true emergency calls about Archie's health. Everything else was off the table. No money, no co-signing, no last-minute babysitting, no fixing his problems. He replied with just, "Fair enough," and actually stuck to it, only texting me twice that month, and both times within the boundaries we'd set. A month later, Damien's co-workers invited him to happy hour after landing a big account. He texted me a photo from outside the bar with the caption, "Heading to AA instead," and I knew what that meant. Later that night, around 11, another text came through. 90 days sober today. Thanks for answering that night. I saved the message and sent back a thumbs up, knowing he'd understand. Lucy called me the following week while I was grocery shopping. She told me she and Damien were still living apart, but had started couples counseling and were learning to communicate without screaming at each other. Money was tight with 2 rents, but they were managing. She'd picked up extra shifts, and Damien was doing food delivery on weekends. She sounded different, calmer, like she was driving her own life instead of being a passenger in Damien's chaos. 6 weeks later, we all gathered for Archie's 5th birthday at the same park where they'd celebrated the CPS closure. Damien had bought an EpiPen trainer and made it part of the party games, having each adult practice while Archie giggled and coached them through the steps. Mom did it perfectly on her first try. Lucy needed 2 attempts. I deliberately messed up so Archie could correct me. Even some of the other parents joined in, turning this medical necessity into something normal and fun. Damien stayed sober the whole party, drinking apple juice from a plastic champagne flute when we toasted Archie. 8 months had passed since that awful night with Archie's allergic reaction, when I finally sat down to take stock of where we'd landed. Damien had made 6 monthly payments on time, $50 each, never missing one. He'd stayed sober, attended meetings twice a week, kept his job even when they'd cut hours. Lucy and Damien were slowly working through their issues, still separated, but co-parenting better than when they'd been together. Mom's blood pressure was finally under control now that she wasn't constantly stressed about us. Archie was thriving in kindergarten. His teacher said he was confident and happy. We weren't close like before. Damien and I maybe talked once a week, and it was usually about logistics, but we were honest now. No more games, no more power plays, no more rescue missions. Maybe that was better than what we'd had before, all that fake closeness built on money and resentment. At least now, when Damien said he was doing okay, I actually believed him. Thanks for hanging out with me and letting me bounce around all these questions today. Really enjoyed digging into it with you. Hope to see you back here soon. Like the video, it helps more than you think.